morning. It's Monday, the 1st of June, 2020. This is Keith Hayes with Rouser Radio, coming out of Lewes in East Sussex in the United Kingdom, praying to anybody who cares to listen. Hope you will join us. It's another lovely day out there, so get with it, shake a leg, and a bit more or less of lockdown today. But be careful, no cuddling and kissing. Well, you can if you know the person well enough, but I can't imagine that I'd want to cuddle and kiss anybody that I didn't know well enough. Well, good morning. Keith Hayes with Rouser Radio in Lewes, East Sussex, and the first day of the 6th month of the year. Is it January, February, March, April, May, June? It is the 6th month of the year. Do a little tap on the fingers to make sure. It's like an abacus, the fingers. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah, you can use the fingers when the computer lets go, and oh boy, do I have things to say about the computer this morning. The computer. Whoever thought that it would actually take the life out of living? That's my bugaboo, and I'm going to talk about it a little later. But first of all, let's tell you a little bit about Lewes, where we come from, we broadcast from. Lewes is the county town of East Sussex. It probably has more history in its little finger than most places on earth. Two very important things, or perhaps three very important things. Number one, it is the site of the Battle of Lewes. Now, in the United Kingdom, we don't pay much attention to the Battle of Lewes. There are many more exciting battles elsewhere. But the Battle of Lewes, which was 1264, was the sounding of the first bell of democracy. And many American schools and many Canadian schools teach that. But do we here? No, we do not. Partly, I suppose, because our castle is rather small. It's a Norman castle. It's rather small, but it's one of the best examples of the early Norman castles anywhere in the country. And our priory, which once dominated the town, is now just a skeleton, because Henry VIII pulled it down, both to stop the power of the church, once he abandoned Rome, split with Rome, and partly because it was very wealthy and he needed the coffers filling. Fortunately, Thomas Cromwell, that's Thomas Cromwell, not Oliver Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, who pulled it down, eventually met a sticky end because he chose a very plain Jane, Anne of Cleves, for Henry VIII as one of his wives, and the boss was not amused. So what he did was he sent Cromwell to the block, and on that day, the executioner, who nobody really wanted to be an executioner, it was a job that somebody had to do. They did it for money, of course, and what happened was that the executioner got terribly drunk so that he could perform the act of dropping the axe on poor Thomas's neck, and had to have 3 goes at it. So the poor chap really died in a really foul and awful way. And while one should really say, I won't revel in that, I can't think that it happened to a nicer guy, because he totally devastated our town of Lewes. But anyway, that was the Battle of Lewes. Then the dissolution of the monasteries, of course, was part of it, because our priory went. And then Queen Mary, who came after her father Henry VIII, tried to bring back Roman Catholicism, and those who opposed her were burned. Horrible death. And here in Lewes, 17 opponents were burned right in the centre of the town. And as a consequence, we now celebrate November the 5th, which is the second time that anybody tampered with the throne, because everybody was delighted when Mary popped her clogs. And when she popped her clogs, everybody went into the streets and they sounded bells and they let off, guess what? Rousers. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. A rouser, R-O-U-S-E-R, is the local word, the local Lewes word, possibly a Sussex word, for firework. And this is rouser radio. It comes in with a bang. Well, that's where rouser came from. But also, in this town, on November the 5th, where 30 or 40 years after the death of Queen Mary, the whole country celebrated the fact that Guy Fawkes had been caught just before he let off a barrel load of dynamite in the Houses of Parliament to blow up the King. And he was eventually, he broke his neck because he leapt from the platform on which the gallows were. But he would have been hung, drawn and quartered, a particularly painful way to die. But we celebrate that along with the death of Queen Mary with big bonfires, big parades. I mean, when I say big parades, they go on for hours and hours and hours. Colourful costumes, fireworks galore, effigies drawn through the streets. Thousands come from the surrounding villages and towns and many instances in other places in the country, because it is the biggest and the finest spectacle of all. Hopefully coronavirus will have been defeated this year quickly enough for the bonfire celebrations to go on, although because they prepare all year for them, I would imagine they may be a little bit muted this year. And the third key issue was that Tom Paine, the American revolutionary, actually he was a Brit, he was anti-monarchy, he believed that man should have rights, and he wrote a book called The Rights of Man, and there's a pub in Lewes called The Rights of Man after him. And he spent 7 years here as a customs and excise officer, stirring up trouble, met Benjamin Franklin in London, and then went off to the United States, where Bill Bryson, the historian, says he named the United States because he was influential, because he was a great orator in persuading the colonists as they went there, to rebel and to declare their independence from the United Kingdom. So a lot has gone on from here, and that's just a little bit of it. So when you hear the word Lewes, you remember not a bad sort of place, an interesting place, and we welcome visitors once lockdown is over. We hope that you'll come and visit us. In the let's see. I've got a little one here called Sunshine. Shall we play a little Sunshine, since it's a beautiful morning out there, and now that it's semi-lockdown, you might be able to get out for an hour or two. that sounds like a bit of sunshine, doesn't it? I really am grateful for the people that put up this type of music on the library on YouTube, because it's a lot of it is great stuff that will never really be heard in mainstream media, and I always intend to give credit to the composer. And I carefully made a note of the people yesterday, and of course I put down the piece of paper and I haven't a clue where it is this morning. However, this is now in my playlist, Sunshine, and I shall, in the coming days, let you know who is the composer, and say a real thank you and give them a bit of publicity, because these pieces that they write, and which we get absolutely free, are in the main pretty damn good. And when you listen to Rouser Radio, it's the only place you're probably likely to hear them for quite some time. So thank you to the gentleman who wrote Sunshine. And sunshine it is, all the way this morning, 12 minutes past 7. I was talking about all the great things that had happened in Lewes, but it also has a sombre side. I can remember when I was a boy, when I was sort of 14 or 15. In those days, you didn't have to worry if you went out on your own into the countryside or onto the streets. Nobody was going to lift you, nobody was going to attack you. It was a pretty safe society, and I'm talking about the 1950s. So a pal and I, who had relatives in Eastbourne, set out on our bikes. It was a long, long ride from Bishop Vesey's Grammar School in the Midlands, in Sutton Coldfield, just outside Birmingham, and we cycled all the way down the country, stopping overnight in a tent, all the way to Eastbourne. But as we came down towards Lewes, and we were going through the streets, and there is what I remember most about Lewes is pedalling up and down them, even as a fit young man. It was not easy. So I remember him saying to me, Lewes, he said, with a deep look on his face, was the hanging town. And indeed, Lewes prison saw many people hanged. And, time is relative, isn't it? I say not too long ago, but in the 1850s they were still hanging ladies, and they were still hanging them publicly. And the last, one of the last ladies ever to be hanged publicly was here in Lewes, and 4,000 people turned up, 4,000 plus people turned up to watch her hang. They sort of made a day of it, and actually that's where the word gallows comes from. It's gala day. You actually had a gala day. You had sort of like a bank holiday, and people would turn up by the thousands just to see some poor soul go to the gallows. And in this case, it was a lady who had internally we always talk about the onion pie murder. She actually fancied her lodger, and she murdered her husband by poisoning him with arsenic, giving him onion pie, which was his favourite. And he bit by bit, of course,